Little Richard told James Brown, "I invented rock and roll, you just copied me," in front of a room full of music legends. The tension was instant. James Brown stopped, turned slowly, and said something that silenced the entire room. What happened in the next 10 minutes at that awards ceremony became one of the most legendary confrontations in music history, and revealed the truth about respect, influence, and who really deserves to be called a king. It was February 1988 at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony in New York City. The ballroom at the Waldorf Astoria was packed with music royalty, musicians, producers, executives, journalists. Everyone who mattered in the industry was there, dressed in tuxedos and gowns, celebrating the pioneers who'd built rock and roll from nothing. James Brown was being inducted that night. At 54 years old, he was still performing, still relevant, still the godfather of soul. He'd revolutionized music multiple times, influenced everyone from Michael Jackson to Prince, and his impact on popular culture was undeniable. Little Richard was already an inductee from the first ceremony in 1986. At 55, he was a legend in his own right, the architect of early rock and roll, the man who'd taught the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, the original wild man of rock and roll. He commanded respect, and he knew it. The two men had history. They both come up in the same era, both from the South, both breaking barriers for black performers in a segregated industry. They'd crossed paths dozens of times over the decades, sometimes friendly, sometimes competitive, always complicated. Tonight, that complication was about to explode. After the formal induction ceremony, there was a reception. The room buzzed with conversation, drinks flowing, legends mingling with legends. James Brown was holding court near the bar, surrounded by admirers, talking about his journey, his influence, his legacy. Little Richard entered the conversation circle. People made space for him. You always made space for Little Richard. He had a presence that demanded it, an energy that was simultaneously magnetic and volatile. "James Brown," Richard said, his voice loud enough to cut through the ambient noise. "The godfather of soul, Mr. Dynamite, the hardest working man in show business." There was something in his tone that made people stop talking and start listening. Brown turned, smiling. "Little Richard, the original wild man. Good to see you, brother." "Brother," Richard repeated, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "That's interesting, because I've been thinking about something, James. You stand up there tonight getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I'm happy for you, I really am. But I need to say something that's been on my mind for a long time." The circle around them was growing. People sensed something was about to happen. "Go ahead," Brown said, his smile fading slightly. "I invented rock and roll, James. Me, Little Richard, Tutti Frutti, Long Tall Sally, Good Golly Miss Molly. I created the sound, the style, the energy. And you took what I built and called it soul. You took my blueprint and acted like you discovered something new. You copied me, James. Let's be honest about that." The room went completely silent. This wasn't playful ribbing between old friends. This was a direct challenge, a public accusation in front of the most important people in music. Brown's jaw tightened. He looked at Richard for a long moment. "You want to do this here? Now? I'm just speaking truth, James. You got up there tonight and talked about revolutionizing music. But what did you revolutionize? You took what I gave the world and put your name on it." Brown set down his drink carefully. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried throughout the room. "Richard, you want to talk about who invented what? Let's talk about it. But let's get the facts straight first." People were pulling out cameras. This was 1988, before smartphones, but journalists knew a story when they saw one. This confrontation would be in tomorrow's papers. "You did invent rock and roll," Brown continued. "I never said you didn't. Tutti Frutti changed everything. You brought energy and wildness and sexuality to music in a way nobody had before. You broke down doors. You made it possible for all of us to exist. I've never denied that. Never. Richard's expression shifted slightly. He'd expected Brown to get defensive, maybe angry. This acknowledgement threw him off. But, Brown continued, his voice getting stronger, what you're calling copying is called building on foundation. Do you think you invented music out of thin air, Richard? Or did you listen to gospel singers? Did you learn from blues musicians? Did you study the performers who came before you and take what they did and make it your own? Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Brown held up his hand. I'm not finished. You want to talk about copying? Let me tell you what I did. I took the energy you brought to rock and roll. I took the rhythm from gospel. I took the storytelling from blues. I took the precision from jazz. And I created something new. Not copied, created. Funk isn't rock and roll, Richard. Funk is its own thing. And soul isn't rock and roll either. It's related, it's influenced by it, but it's not the same. Brown stepped closer to Richard, not threatening, but direct. You broke the door down. I walked through it and built a whole new house. That's not copying. That's evolution. That's how music works. That's how art works. You stand on the shoulders of giants, and then you become a giant that someone else stands on. Richard's face was red now. So you're saying you're better than me? That what you did matters more than what I did? No, Brown said firmly. I'm saying we both matter. But what I won't accept, what I can't accept, is you standing here trying to diminish what I built because you feel like you're not getting enough credit for what you built. That's ego, Richard. That's insecurity. And you're better than that. The room was completely still. Several legendary musicians were watching this exchange with expressions ranging from shock to fascination to recognition. Many of them had felt the same tensions Richard was expressing. You want to know the difference between you and me? Brown continued. The difference isn't talent. We both have that. The difference isn't influence. We both changed music forever. The difference is that I'm secure enough to acknowledge everyone who came before me and everyone who came after me. I don't need to tear down the next generation to feel important. I don't need to claim I invented everything to feel valid. Richard's voice shook when he spoke. You don't understand what it's like to watch everyone take what you created and, don't I? Brown interrupted. Richard, every rapper who's ever sampled my music took something I created. Michael Jackson studied my moves and made them his own. Prince built his whole style on funk that I pioneered. And you know what I do? I celebrate it. I'm proud of it, because that means what I created mattered enough to influence the future. Brown's voice softened slightly. You're worried about your legacy, Richard. I get it. You see younger people get celebrated, and you wonder if people remember what you did. But let me tell you something. You don't secure your legacy by attacking the people who came after you. You secure it by being so undeniably great that nobody can forget you even if they tried. He paused. And Richard, nobody's forgetting you. You're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You changed everything. But that doesn't mean nobody else gets to change anything after you. Richard stood there, his legendary bravado visibly shaken. Several people in the crowd were nodding, including some who'd been in Richard's camp when the conversation started. Let me ask you something, Brown said. If I'm such a copy of you, how come we sound nothing alike? How come funk doesn't sound like Tutti Frutti? How come soul music isn't just rock and roll with a different name? If all I did was copy you, where did this different sound come from? Richard didn't answer. I'll tell you where it came from, Brown said. It came from me taking what you did, what gospel did, what blues did, what jazz did, and creating something that had never existed before. That's not copying, that's artistry. That's what you did with the people who came before you, and it's what I did with the people who came before me. Brown extended his hand. Richard, you're a king. I've never disputed that, but there's room for more than one king. We don't have to diminish each other. We can both be great without one of us being a copy or a fraud. Can we agree on that? Richard looked at Brown's extended hand. The entire room was watching. This was a moment that would define how both men would be remembered, not just as individual artists, but in relation to each other. Finally, Richard took Brown's hand. "You always did have a way with words, James. And you always had a way with a piano," Brown replied. "Maybe we should focus on celebrating what we each brought, instead of arguing about who brought it first." Richard nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." "Of course I'm right," Brown said with a slight smile. "I'm James Brown." The tension broke. People laughed nervously, then more genuinely. Richard even cracked a smile. "But seriously," Brown said, still holding Richard's hand, "you need to understand something. What you created mattered so much that it's still influencing music 40 years later. That's immortality, Richard. That's the legacy you're worried about losing. But you can't lose something that powerful. It's baked into the foundation of everything that came after." He released Richard's hand. "And that includes what I did. I couldn't have created funk without you creating rock and roll. I don't deny that. I honor it. But honoring your influence doesn't mean I didn't create something new. Both things are true." Richard looked around the room at all the faces watching him. "James, I apologize. I was out of line." "You were protecting your legacy," Brown said. "I understand that. But your legacy doesn't need protecting. It's bulletproof. And it doesn't diminish when someone else succeeds. If anything, the fact that I built on what you started makes what you did even more important, not less." Someone in the crowd started clapping. Then another person. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. Not for one or the other, but for both of them. For the honest exchange, for the reconciliation, for the wisdom in Brown's words. After the reception, a journalist caught Brown alone. "That was intense. You could have destroyed little Richard up there. Why didn't you?" Brown looked at the journalist like he'd asked the stupidest question in the world. "Why would I destroy someone I respect? Richard's insecurity doesn't erase his genius. His fear doesn't diminish his contributions. I'm secure enough in what I did that I don't need to tear him down to build myself up. But he attacked you publicly. He was hurting, afraid of being forgotten. I've been there. The difference is whether you respond to that fear by attacking others or by reminding yourself of your own value. I chose to remind Richard of his value while also standing up for mine. That's not weakness. That's strength." The confrontation between James Brown and Little Richard became legendary. But what people remembered wasn't the argument. It was how it was resolved. Brown's refusal to engage in ego warfare, his acknowledgement of Richard's importance while defending his own contributions, became a template for how artists should handle influence and legacy. Richard later said in interviews, "James Brown taught me something that night. He taught me that greatness isn't about being first or being only. It's about being undeniable. And we were both undeniable, just in different ways." Brown, when asked about it, would say Richard and I were both kings, but we ruled different kingdoms. Rock and roll was his. Funk was mine. The fact that my kingdom was built on land he discovered doesn't make me less of a king. It makes him more of a visionary for discovering that land in the first place. The lesson from that night at the Waldorf Astoria wasn't about who invented what or who influenced whom. It was about understanding that influence isn't theft, that building on someone's foundation isn't copying, and that multiple legends can coexist without diminishing each other. If this story about ego, legacy, and the difference between influence and imitation moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that you can honor those who came before you while still claiming what you've created. Subscribe for more stories about legends who understood that greatness isn't a competition. And remember, you can stand on someone's shoulders and still be a giant in your own right.